Welcome to Carrying the Banner, a travelogue through the itinerary of the national tour of Newsies the Musical. I'm your host, Andrew Wilson, and I'm thrilled to bring you along as we travel city to city, offering insights from life on the road, travel recommendations, and some of the highs and lows of performing Newsies night after night, 8 shows per week for 2 years across 65 North American cities. So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second show. In today's episode, we welcome back Chaz Wolcott, who played Buttons in Newsies the Musical's first national tour and in the Disney Plus live capture as well. Hi, Chaz.
Hi, Andrewsakins. How are you?
I'm well. I wish that you could see. I'm like gesturing you with my hands over the microphone. Now, he just called me Andrewsakins. I will say that I did pen pretty much a nickname for every single person on that tour, and you were Chaznastics.
Chaznastics. Yeah.
Yes, you were penned that right from like day one, practically. But friends, in case you missed our premiere episode, I encourage you to go back and give it a listen, where we really get into the audition and rehearsal process of putting together a national tour and also New York City, but also about Chaz. Chaz, can you just give a quick rundown again of where you're from, where you trained in dance, and what you're up to now?
Yeah, I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio. I also spent some of my childhood in Las Vegas, Nevada. I originally trained to dance in Pinnell Dance Center in Ohio and then the Dance Zone in Nevada, and went to college at Oklahoma City University for dance and then moved to New York City. And since then, I have been a performer, then director and choreographer. And I also recently got my master's degree from the University of Idaho and am a college professor as well now.
And you did that all while teaching, right? You were like teaching and you were in your master's program, which was mostly online.
Yes. Yeah, it was a mostly virtual program, which was awesome. So I could attend it from wherever I was working at the time.
Are you a
Did that
person
while
who
teaching.
can cook like 7 parts of a dinner like at once?
It's funny you would ask that. Yes, I am. And I actually did a like piece for a grad school class where I was using the visual of like having things on the back burner. Like so I had like my directing career in one pot and my teaching
Oh, I
and
love
like did this
that.
whole thing trying to keep all the things burning at the same time and just like how incredibly exhausting but exciting but exhausting that is. So it's funny you would use that analogy because that is I think that is the perfect one is like keeping
That
all
really
the
is perfect.
fires lit at the same time. Yeah.
Speaking of cooking, I think that my culinary skills pretty much are summed up with I remember being on the national tour of Cats, and I really wanted no bake cookies, but you have to like melt butter or something, and we didn't have a microwave. And so I remember putting like a stick of butter in a coffee pot and just turning it on warm and then mixing the oatmeal and all the things in this coffee pot. They were disgusting. Anyway,
The
so
things you do on tour. Yes.
yes. Thanks so much for filling in our listeners on yourself, Chaz.
Yeah.
So to set the scene, so we've finished our studio rehearsals in Times Square in New York City, and we're about to hit the road for Schenectady, New York, to begin teching our show. Could you fill us in on what tech is to people who might not know?
Yeah, so we rehearsed this show first in a studio with very little technical element. For Newsies, we actually did have sort of the physical structures of the towers. They were only 2 stories because we didn't have a studio big enough to do 3 stories. But sometimes you do it with nothing in the rehearsal space, depending on what the show is. But then when you move into tech, you usually move onto the stage and you build in the whole set and the lights and the microphones and all the technical elements of the show. And you go through the show and slowly add all those things in. So our tech process was kind of building in all the other things besides just the staging and the singing and the dancing. We had to add in the band, we had to add in the lights, we had to add in the crew, the towers, the microphone, all the things. It's a pretty huge undertaking, so it takes multiple weeks for a big show like Newsies.
Now, people have dubbed this that because Schenectady, New York, which is about 3.5 hours north of New York City, people also call it Scatectady.
Yes.
So, okay, so flashback again. So it's 9 a.m. I looked this up, 9 a.m. on September 28th, 2014. We were told by our company management to assemble outside the New Amsterdam Theater on 41st Street to board 2 coach buses for our 3.5 hour bus ride to Schenectady. Now, did getting on that coach bus bring you back to your experience on tour with Cats the musical?
Yes, we talked about this in the first episode, but Andrew and I both did Cats on tour, which meant at the time that we were most of the time traveling via a big coach bus. It was a little different because this was only 3.5 hours, and we often did not ride on a bus in Newsies.
Yes.
Yeah, in Cats, I had a foam mattress pad so I could sleep on the floor. I had a
Yeah,
little
I was gonna
shower
say, is there
caddy on the
anything you would
window.
recommend bringing? Is there anything you'd recommend bringing if you're gonna do what they call a bus and truck tour, meaning predominantly your set is on obviously on a truck and the cast is on a bus and crew. Anything you can recommend
Yeah.
purchasing?
Like I said, I had those, it's like a egg crate mattress pad top. Like you normally put it on top of a mattress. In this particular instance, you put it on top of the bus floor, and you could sleep underneath the seat. So you weren't sleeping on the actual floor. It does get warm down there though. But it is usually more comfortable because you can stretch out all the way. And then I always had like a shower caddy that has those little suction cups, and I put it on the
Mm-hmm.
window so I could put like my phone, or like I would, for a while I would, knit, and so I'd put my knitting supplies in there. I definitely recommend something that maybe isn't a phone, like a technological device for you to do, because sometimes like looking at a phone or a computer or something you can get dizzy or something, on a moving vehicle. So a lot of people would read, or like I said, I knitted. I started making a lot of scarves on that tour.
Impressive.
Yeah, and sleeping. I would just sleep a lot because I think that was the easiest thing to do.
Now,
So
for
yeah.
me, when I was on my first two tours, I was on this tour of Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, where we played about 5 to 6 cities a week. Yeah, it was a lot. And I was also on Cat's bus and truck. That essentially there's two types of people. You are either a floor sleeper, which meant just like you were saying, you get an egg crate bed topper thing that you can roll up quickly on a stop and lay out, or you're a seat sleeper.
Yes. Yeah.
Which were you obviously more of a floor sleeper?
I was a floor sleeper, but in that particular tour, we had what we would, call bus buddies. So I literally had
Yeah,
someone
same.
sitting in the seat next to me. On some maybe smaller shows, you might get two seats to yourself, but in
I
that
think it's
particular show,
pretty on equity tours at least. You like always have your own
two
two
seats.
seat pairing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely shared.
I shared too.
Um,
And so my bus buddy most of the time was my friend Brad, who was much smaller than me. So
like Brad Trump.
Brad Trump,
Oh, I love him.
he would sleep on the seats because he was a little smaller, and then I could sleep on the floor because I was a little taller. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it kind of just worked out that way. I think I prefer a bus floor sleeping just because I like to be able to stretch.
I'm a floor sleeper too. On my first tour, I was definitely on the floor. Second tour, I was floor, and then my bus seat mate, Molly Winter Stewart, and the kitten swing, she decided one day I want to be a floor sleeper, and so I was on the seat, and I was like, my legs just keep falling off of everything,
Yep.
and so I remember I bought like a yoga strap sort of thing that had like a belt loop, and I would loop it and then put it over the seat in front of me, and then put the backs of my knees, like put my legs through it. So I was like kind of like a little leg hammock thing.
Okay. Yeah.
And that wound up working for me. Sometimes it would cut the circulation off, so I would put like a blanket underneath it, but oh, and definitely like a big fleece blanket.
Some kind of thing that you could wear. It would be the other, one of those like blanket hoodie thing, that's kind of
Yep.
like you can
Oh
put it on.
yeah, like the Snuggie or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now my first tour was in 2004, 2005, and then that Cats tour was 2006, 2007, where the laptop wasn't as big of a thing then, and there was definitely no internet. And
Oh, yeah.
I remember every day for the first like 3 hours, it was like silence. You were not allowed to talk or
Quiet
do
hours.
anything, quiet hours. But then, usually after the first or second rest stop, you could watch a movie.
Hmm.
And I just remember you would always have those giant, massive like DVD sleeves.
Yeah, I was one of the movie hosts. I brought my DVDs on tour. Yeah, like a
And you would vote.
huge.
Can you remember like a fan favorite of yours to watch?
Yes, Waiting for Guffman was probably the most popular choice. Just with a bunch of theater people on a bus, it felt like the right movie.
Yeah. Well, I remember it was my birthday and someone said, "Oh, Andrew's never seen Mommy Dearest. Let's watch it." And so I was like, okay, this gay campy film, whatever. I wound up taking it way too seriously. And I was like, this woman is so abusive to these children. This is so horrible. Like, I was so distraught on my
Right.
19th birthday that to this day, it's a movie I can't forgive people laughing at. I'm like, this is so cruel. She is hitting this child with wire hangers.
We tried to do a democracy where we would vote for
Oh,
the
you would
movie.
always vote. Yes.
But see, our tour got kind of got testy for a bit. So then we had instead of a democracy, we would have one singular person would pick it per day, and we would go down the list. So you'd like have your movie day where you got to pick the movie you wanted to watch. Those movies were actually very necessary, right? Because the bus
Oh,
can get
yeah. I mean, we would be
really
on the bus for
tiring.
like 8 to 16 hours a
Yeah,
day.
yeah, especially
And
I'm sure
then
on that first
on
tour.
Cat's
Yeah,
tour, you would do a show sometimes.
yeah.
Um, but
People don't really realize that, especially if you are seeing a national tour in somewhat of a smaller town, right? Maybe not like a top 10 city in America, but like a smaller city. And those smaller towns probably means that we drove in on a bus that day, sometimes went straight to the theater, and I occasionally would leave after the show that night on the
yes,
bus
and
and drive
drive through some of the
overnight.
night.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so there's some really, really tough travel scheduling that will happen on those tours. So if you're in a smaller city in America and you're seeing a national tour, really have some
Give
love
them
for
some
that
love.
cast because they
Yeah.
probably are very, very, very tired, and they probably did most of their sleeping on a
On the
bus.
floor, on an egg
Yes,
crate, or
on an
with a
egg
leg
crate in the
hammock.
bus.
Yeah.
Yes, a leg hammock.
Leg hammock. I'm gonna start selling them. I will. So he's speaking of like A cities and then B and C, and then for my first tour, probably Z cities. But I really loved. There's one. Can you think of one town that really stuck out to me? It's always this Alto, New Mexico. I've played it twice on tour. It's like way up high in the mountains. And
Wow.
I want to say the entire lobby is like Chihuly sculptures and glass chandeliers, but that whole town is magical. Like if I could be transported anywhere in the country right now, I would be like Alto, New Mexico. Do you have like a random small
Wow.
city that you love?
Yeah, well, on Cats we had like I said, we played such diverse styles of theaters, but the smallest one we ever played was in a town called Hutchinson, Kansas, which was like if you can a
Mm,
suburb of Wichita, so not even as big as Wichita, but like a distant
yeah.
hour-long away suburb of Wichita. But what's funny is the name of the theater there is the Fox, and the Fox theaters are historically known as some of the biggest theaters in America in
Yep.
Atlanta, St. Louis, and Detroit, I believe. But this one was not
Wow,
did
they
not
have a
follow.
Fox Theater in Hutchinson.
Yes, I don't know,
That's
I
so
mean, I don't know if it's
cool.
connected to those, but it's this tiny, tiny little space. In fact, there was no bathroom backstage, no working bathroom backstage. So we actually had to take the cats out to the lobby and wait in line for a very small, like a one, like one stall private bathroom
Yes.
with the patrons. Like before the show, we were
Oh,
literally waiting with patrons,
what a show.
and our female ensemble would dress on a truck because there was no backstage space, so they're like quick changes and stuff would happen in the back of a semi truck at that venue. However, it was one of the best audiences we ever had because I don't think Hutchinson, Kansas had ever had a national tour of that caliber come through. I'm not sure they ever had a national tour come through. So it was like this really warm welcome from this audience. It was one of the best like audiences I ever remember because I think they were just like so excited we were there.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
remember
Those
that.
smaller cities really are very special audiences. Okay, so we're on the bus
Mhm.
from New York to Schenectady, 3.5 hour
Yes.
planned bus
Yes.
ride.
The
And
famous bus ride.
the famous bus ride, one
We
of
would
our
never.
beloved cast members, we were at our first rest stop. Chaz, can you describe what happened here?
Yeah, in that particular rest stop, I believe we were just at like a rest area on the side of the highway where there was like a bathroom and some vending machines. And our wonderful crutchy, I'm not allowed to name names. Am I allowed
You
to
can
name?
say correct. Zach
Okay.
Sale, yes.
Our
Sweet
wonderful
Zachary
Zachary
Sale.
Sale getting ready to debut Letter from the Refuge for the first time in front of audiences in Schenectady. Let's just say that the rest area became his refuge because we
And we
accidentally
had
left him
driven for like, I
behind.
feel like a few minutes. Like, if it was like 5 or 10
Yeah.
minutes, and someone said, "Hey, I don't see Zach."
And the problem was we were on one of those freeways where there were no exits. So we actually
Yes.
drove
We
much
drove like
farther before we
30
could turn
minutes
around.
north. So
Hmm.
this is speaking of, remember we talked about Josh Burge on the first episode. I remember we had to get off in like Woodstock, New York or something. And we got off the highway to do pretty much a U-turn, and Josh, out of nowhere, just grabbed a microphone and started giving like
Yes,
a
yes.
tour bus tour. He'd be like, "Welcome to Woodstock. Here is the Apple Butter
Yes.
Festival." And we were all
Yep.
like, "This kid never talks. What is happening?" And we were cackling.
He really
Um,
came out of his shell on that bus. Well, the
but
the audience needed it. We were stressed for Zach. No
we were
one,
stressed.
knew his
And so yeah,
situation.
we had to drive 30 minutes north, and then of course you have to like backtrack enough to be able to get to that rest stop. So we drove like
I think
almost
we had
45 minutes to like an hour south.
I think we also, yeah, I was gonna say, I think we also had to pass the rest stop
Yes, you
on
had to
the other
pass
side and
it
come back
because
to
the
it. Yeah.
exits are like 20 miles apart and then
Yeah.
get to the rest stop. Poor kid. And then, so
He was
that's why I
there
say
for quite a while.
the 3.5 hour bus trip, which more often happens than not, became probably like 6 hours almost.
Yeah. We were in
Um,
that bus for quite a while.
yeah. So we arrive in Schenectady now. For our listeners, every city that you arrive on tour, Equity, our union, requires to give two hotel options, and on an Equity production tour, let's say. And generally, the one is more expensive and quote unquote nicer, and then one is cheaper and sometimes further away from the theater. And if the hotel options are further than zero point 0.5 miles from the stage door, they're required to either give us a rental car or a bus shuttle to get to and from the theater. In this odd instance, our hotel options were the Fairfield Inn or Town Place Suites, which were nearly 20 minutes away in Albany, across from the SUNY Albany campus, which is strange because you pull into Schenectady and there's like uh, some sort of hotel like right on the main strip
Right.
there. But
Right.
do you remember which hotel you stayed at?
Definitely the Town Place Suites. Always a Town Place
Oh, that
Suites
was
for
the
me.
fancy one. Okay. And did you
Mhm.
have a roommate?
I did not. I often did not. I liked having my own space and doing my own thing a lot of the time. But what I was going to recommend is if you're ever going on a tour or even doing some kind of job where you travel a lot, the lovely Mark Aldrich, who was in our tour, told me
Hmm.
this during rehearsals, and I took him up on it. Is I got a hotel credit card, so I got a Marriott credit card. So for every
Wow.
episode, if there's a Marriott option, I always chose that because you get 6 times the points when you use your Marriott card at
Wow.
Marriott properties. So
I didn't
I
know that. That's amazing.
still to this day I'm like a platinum elite Marriott member and get free hotels all the time because of the tour of Newsies from 10 years ago. So
Well, when are we going
um,
back to Albany to use your
anytime.
points? That
Yeah,
sounds
well, I've
amazing.
always dreamt of staying at the Town Place, 20
Always.
minutes away again. But I will say that there's also like a negotiation in your mind about that. Sometimes I would choose the farther away hotel simply so that they would have to provide me a rental
The
car
rental
so I
car,
could have a
yeah.
car. Yeah.
And on this tour, you and I were probably one of four people who was old enough to drive one.
Ah,
But
yes, I was
but
just gonna say you do have to be 25 to have a rental
25,
car, and
yes.
in this particular tour, we had a lot
So
of
it was
people
you and
under
me and
25.
Steven
Yes.
Hernandez. Now, and also, so you are allowed to have a roommate and just literally share the main cost. There's not an additional charge. And I
Mhm.
remember during rehearsals, I didn't really know anyone. And I remember Evan Audio, one of the Newsies, had reached out to me and said, "Do I want to room with him?" And I remember we chose the Fairfield Inn because it allowed pets.
Oh,
And Evan
right.
had his little
Twas.
puppy at the time. Twas, yeah, yeah. And Chaz, you have a dog now.
I
Can
do.
you tell us about them?
Yes, Quincy. And he goes everywhere with me now, but I didn't have him during Newsies, but he goes
Right.
everywhere with me now. So yes, that would probably be reason for choosing a hotel now would be if Quincy was allowed or not.
Now, if you, yeah, I was gonna say if would because obviously you've traveled with Quincy quite a bit. Any travel advice for those with pets?
Well, if you ever want to travel, you just need to get a animal that is small enough to travel with. I think it's much easier to make it happen. I can put Quincy in a backpack. He weighs about 16 pounds. It's a little bit heavy of a backpack, but
Do you have to pay for like an additional seat on planes or anything like that?
yeah, it depends on if your dog is a service animal or an ESA or not. The service animals don't have to be paid for, but if it's a ESA or a pet, they have to stay in a bag. They can go under a seat if they fit under the seat, and you do have to pay per flight. So that can get really pricey. It can be really challenging.
See,
Sure.
I have a bottlenose dolphin, and I always have to bring like three seats. It's really challenging.
What you all
Um,
should know as listeners to Andrew's podcast is that he
I
will
tried to convince the entire cast to walk the Vegas Strip to see the dolphins at the Mirage at three
you
in the morning.
are he is a he is the best improvisational liar I've ever met in my entire life. He will just make up an
Lies.
elaborate story, and
Okay,
he
listen.
will involve
Back to the show.
any person. And I hope you tell a story about this in every city, because you had some of the best improvisational games where we would go out to dinner with one of our very straight castmates, and he would tell the waitress that we were there celebrating them
That
coming
they just
out
came
that
out of the
morning. Yeah,
closet,
yeah,
yes. And that was
yeah.
often if I wanted to pay for something and they'd be
Yes.
like, no, 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 I'm paying. I'd be like, he just came out of the closet today.
We're
Let me do
celebrating.
it.
Yep,
And they would
yep.
get so red. Um, Anyway, but so back to the
Uh,
show. Okay, so we arrived via shuttle bus every
mm,
morning to the gorgeous Proctor's Theater in downtown Schenectady. Just to give a little bit of historical backstory, I looked this up. It opened in 1926 and was named after vaudeville impresario Frederick Freeman Proctor, impresario being a fancy word for a producer. It is most known for the world's first public demonstration of a television back in May of 1930. So we got the 100th anniversary coming up, and it's due to because the GE headquarters is actually in Schenectady. I personally think this theater in Schenectady are the perfect place to tech a show. Do you have
yeah.
any thoughts on that?
There's a lot of shows that tech in Schenectady, but it's also a great theater town. I remember the crew and the costume, like the wardrobe folks that we worked with there, like they just all were like legends of theater, So I just think
Yeah.
it's a great place that supports building new shows and building new tours. And so I think it was an awesome place to spend a few weeks and work on putting our show together.
Something that I really loved about it too is it has this enormous like atrium attached to it that also has like a
Yes.
giant coffee shop and there's other theaters there and it's perfect for like going over choreography and taking notes and there's this big balcony that you can document traffic patterns and staging for the show and being a
Yeah.
dance captain and a swing. And I want to give a quick shout out to swings. I want to give a shout out to our original ones, Josh Asor, Stephen Hernandez, EJ Malum, and Melissa Stedman. They're amazing. And I really can't stress enough to our audience that if you don't know what a swing is, they are grand understudies for the show. Oftentimes, they will understudy principal roles as well, but their main job is to understudy the entire ensemble. And they really go through a rough time during rehearsal and tech. Like, for instance, I remember in rehearsals, more often than not, there's a table read where they set up tables in like a big square, and the whole cast and creatives are there. And there's often a swing table off to the side where
Hmm.
they're kind of left out. Also, while like everyone during rehearsals in tech is like geeking and having a good time and learning like their one track, these people are juggling five, six, seven, and in my case, and in the other swings, like 18 different tracks. And you're not in tech really allowed to go up on stage and feel what the stage and the towers feel like, or touch the props or do these costume changes. And
Right.
more often than not, you're thrown on stage sometimes because someone injured their foot or whatever. And stage management does their best to try to get swings time on stage, but really it is I just remember we would leave a tech rehearsal day and everyone's like, where are we going to go to food and stuff? And I would go home and just be like, I need to take what is it, like a tomato juice bath because I have hives all over my body. I was so just anxious that entire time. It was
Yeah. Well,
not
tech
a
is
good time for
so
me.
stressful for everyone. Tech is people like make t-shirts that say tech is fun, but I think it's like a little bit of irony because usually tech is very stressful. There's
Yeah.
just a lot of things to bring together, and you try to keep a positive spirit, but especially as a swing, I had to remember all the blocking and all of the entrances and where I'd pick up props and when I could move and when the tower was moving so it didn't run me over and all those things
Yeah.
for one role in the show. For buttons, I had to think about what buttons had to do. You had to think about that from like 14, 18 different people.
And you
And
really get
so
to know your little isms.
yeah,
Like,
for sure.
my paper is a half paper that's folded underneath this one little thing. And if I don't get that exact paper, the entire paper dance is screwed up.
Right. And like we would mess all of those things up constantly, especially in tech, right? Like you would forget these things. And so a swing trying to memorize all of that information for not only one role in the show, but you had an obscene amount of things that you covered.
That movie, The Civil War, that came out over the summer, is actually about my internal organs during Newsies. So, from tech process, do you have like any favorite memories that stick out?
Yeah, I just remember the whole thing being very I was just impressed at like the grandiose nature of this tech. I'd never been a part of something quite as big and quite, especially with the towers being so, and these are I mean, I don't know their worth, but millions of dollars worth of technological innovation to have these projection screens and surfaces that would roll down and these towers that would move with the press of a button from backstage. I mean, all of that like innovation and technology coming into a show, just it was like something to marvel at every day. And I know that like, I was over there worried about like, oh, it's so high. I'm a little afraid of heights, and I'm just like looking at this like multi-million-dollar revolving set that has projection, and I'm like, oh,
Oh, Tobin
get over your
Ost,
fear of
that
heights.
set designer, Tobin Ost outdid himself.
Yeah,
That the
it's
Newsies
incredible.
set is, they often call those three towers what? Newsy like 15, 16, 17 or something like that.
Yeah,
Because they really
right.
are like dancers.
Yeah.
I remember for the tour, they had tried to scale back the set a little bit by cutting like, I think it was like 10 inches off the front deck of our stage. I
Yes.
remember we got to, I think it was Hudson Scenic and Yonkers, and Lou Castro and Eduardo Castro were both like, you literally can't do certain set moves now. So they literally spent like $1 million and redid that whole deck to add it back. Also, I know in episode 1 we mentioned how Jeff Cohoon gave that great speech about like these are the great times. I remember day 1 of tech, he said another fantastic speech, and he mentioned how important it is for us to get to know every single crew member, whether it's your dresser, spotlight operators, the ushers, like really spend your time getting to know these people because you're a family. I have to say, like, our crew is amazing. Two crew members that really stood out to me as a swing was Jen Kramer and Dan Beisch, who were on props.
Oh
I
yeah.
can't tell you how much, like, as a swing, I relied on their like warmth. They were so nice. Dan, do you
Yes.
remember on stage, right? Dan in the prop shelf had created like a little like Pride Rock scenario.
Yes.
It had
Yes.
like all
Yeah.
these like amethyst crystals and stuff,
Yep.
and like
Yep.
just like the best. They would always be like, Andrew, you're actually gonna go in the wing three. Yep. Like with a set piece coming out and I was in the wrong wing. Like they were just the best. I also want to shout out during tech, Patty Grab and Kristen Torgrimson, two of our stage managers. Do you remember they notated every single prop in that show? Like
Yes.
every single prop, where it goes, how it's folded, if this sheet is scored, where
Yeah.
Dan's bag of chips belongs in the set
Right.
before
Right. Oh
manifest.
yes. Right. I forgot about his bag of
So
chips.
many
Yes.
props. Like shout out to
Yes.
them. Were there any like crew members that you can recall off the top of your head 10 years later
Oh my
that
gosh. I mean, I think just Jeff's speech worked because I really do feel like I've done shows before where it kind of felt like cast and crew were on not quite united all the time. And
Mhm.
I did not feel that way about Newsies. I felt like we were all very much, not to be cliche about it, but very much a family that was all working together. And I mean, I was really close with Nicole and Jess, who were our sort of like our lighting folks. We had, I mean,
Yeah.
everybody really like I truly everyone. My truly one of my best friends on the tour was our physical therapist Gina, who
Oh,
I would like
Gina.
live with and do road trips with and stuff, and so I think we all started to bond. I think it's really important for people in theater to not have these weird divisions between onstage and offstage. First of all, it's just silly, but secondly, I mean, on a practical level, the people that are working on the show are all artistic collaborators together, right? There's no some like I feel like sometimes casts can have this sort of sense of hierarchy over people working backstage, which I think is disgusting. And I think that it's a tour is a great opportunity to get to know some other people because we were together with these people for 2 years, right? We were traveling around the country for 2 years together. So you get to know a lot of those people. I also like shout out people that probably people wouldn't think of. Bernadette was one of our
Bernadette.
stalwarts
Our
on the tour. She was our children's wrangler for our lessons. She was also their tutor. She was, they were kids, they had to be in school, so she would have school time with them every day, and she was a bit of a mom for all of us on the tour. So and like I said, all of our physical therapists that we had at different times on the tour were all very close members of our little fam, our stage management team.
such a
We just
part of
had
the
so
family.
many,
You're
yeah, our
so right.
musicians, right? Like we traveled with a huge group of people that was not, not just the 20 or 30 you saw on stage, but special shout out to the parents of our lesses, some of which I still consider like really close friends, right? Like I
Absolutely.
said, we had some built-in moms and dads on the tour. So all of them, I was lucky enough, you were lucky enough to do the show for a while. So we had quite a
Yeah,
few
you and I
lesses.
were one of the few that rode out the entire tour.
Or the total, yeah. So 2 years, less is often because they would grow so quickly. They became a little too tall to play less, and a lot of the time they would only stay for 6 months. So we had six, eight maybe lesses throughout the time we were there. So we got some really great moms and dads traveling with us at different times that are incredible humans and just lovely spirits to have around as well. Sometimes we had a sister, sometimes we had a girlfriend, sometimes we had wives and husbands traveling with us. We had a very, very, very special member of the company who was only, I believe, one and a half when we started the tour, and that was Ren. And I'm sure you will interview her parents at some point. But having a little baby and a dog, and it's a whole kit and caboodle was traveling around the country with.
So a very special thing that Proctor's Theater in Schenectady does is they have each touring cast create a portable dressing room station of their own show.
Yes.
Chaz, can you tell the listeners a bit about our Newsies table? And do you remember what show station you had?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had mine. So after you create these tables, it's like a dressing room table that has like a mirror with lights and some shelves. And I know the Newsies one had like little drawers at the bottom. Then those get used for future cast members who come through and tour into that venue. That's one of the most special traditions I've seen at any theater. And Proctor's really, it's a great idea. It was like an awesome way to start our tour too, because I think it put us all onto the page of like trying to find ways to kind of, I guess, leave our mark on each show. We would do like wall tags backstage in a lot of places, but Proctor's is the only place I remember building a dressing table. But I had Peter Pan. The tour of Peter Pan was mine, and
Kathy Rigby?
I don't know that I remember if it was
Because
Kathy Rigby's or
I was
not.
on the Kathy Rigby tour, but only in 2011. So
I was like trying to
and we
look.
didn't play
I was
Schenectady.
looking back at a picture, but I don't see like enough. I can't see the details of the names enough to see. But oh
Our
yeah, Kathy
table,
Rigby is Peter Pan. Yeah, it says Kathy Rigby at the
Yay.
top. Yeah, but it says "Think lovely, wonderful thoughts, and up
That's
you go" right on the mirror.
so
And that was
sweet.
such a lovely. And I remember when we were building the Newsies one, I was like, "Oh, we have to have a quote. We have to have a quote." Because I had a quote on mine, the Peter Pan one. I thought it was so great, and so we put the "Keep your eyes on the stars and your feet on the ground" that Roosevelt says
Wow. Because
on the Newsies
I
one.
remember didn't we decoupage with newsprint on the table part?
Yep.
And then we made the
We made
towers holding up the
the shelves.
lights. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. And
Or
the
the
mirror.
shelves on
That's
the
so
side of the
cool.
lights were like we made them look like the towers, and we had newspapers like Mod Podge all over
I need
the.
to see if we can find a photo of those.
I've
That's
got him. I've
awesome.
got him. I'm
Oh,
looking
send
at him
them
right
to
now.
me.
I'll
I'll
send it to you.
post them on
Yeah.
the Instagram.
It's super cute. Yeah. And we were all very proud of that. We worked really hard on that
Yeah.
and what a great tradition. I love when theaters do wall tags. Wall tags would be like these like little squares on the wall where you'll kind of like paint your show logo, and
I
then
mean, I
everybody
think
everybody will sign it.
the second greatest one aside from Proctor's is Durham Performing Arts Center.
Is that the opposite where they
That's where
do?
you do the opposite, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you're like on Hamilton, you would make your poster look like Mary Poppins on Broadway.
Yeah. They would like
Yeah.
use the themes of a logo from a different
I
show,
think
but then
Shrek
put their
did the
show.
Lion King logo. Like they made the Simba face look like Shrek,
Yes.
maybe
Yeah.
something. Anyway.
Yeah. There's some really great. I love, and I that would also like. I'm Patty Grab, one of our stage managers, did a lot of those. Jen Kramer, I think, did some of them as well. Our wall tags. They would always try to make them creative and maybe tie something to do with the city into what they would paint on. Sometimes they would paint the logo, but sometimes they would try to get a little creative and paint something that honored the city we were in, or something funny that happened there, or whatever. And those are just like really special memories. What I love more than anything is to this day, I still get texts all the time from friends that are out on other tours that will be like things. They'll take a picture of my signature somewhere.
Yes.
One of the biggest ones I remember for sure is in St. Louis at the Fox. We had kind of our own dressing rooms, and in that particular theater, the dressing rooms, each dressing room kind of had its own little thing. So there was a show one where there's some legendary show ones at the Fox in St. Louis downstairs, but up in the dressing rooms, they also did sort of like little tags for the people who were actually in that dressing room. And so we slapped a picture of the four of us that were in that dressing room on
Oh, yeah,
wall.
yeah, yeah. I remember
And
that.
people send me that all the time. I get like people see it all the time. And so it's so, I think that's one of the things that's so beautiful about touring is you go to all these different places and then your friends go to there later. And there's just so many memories in those theaters. And we have so many. That's why I love the idea of this podcast is we're kind of getting to think back to these great memories we created in each of these cities.
Yeah.
And I'm sure
Truly,
everybody
the
else will
backstage at the
remember
Fox really is like 5 or 6 levels of just legendary artwork
legends,
everywhere.
legends.
So it's now October 11th. We make it to our very first paid audience preview. I remember looking out the dressing room windows out back and seeing lines the whole way out to the parking lot. And I also remember Tom Schumacher and Alan Menken and Jack Feldman and Harvey Firestein threw us like a happy first performance because I think our first performance may have been a matinee. It was at Johnny's Italian restaurant across the street from the theater. It was super delicious. Do you remember anything from that day?
I do. I mean, what I remember is even in that first, we would call that a preview. I think we officially called it like previews in Schenectady. So in our
Hmm.
mind, it's not like quite the opening night, but I mean, it was but like, anyway, so I didn't know that the fansies would show up so quickly, but wow, did they? They were there in droves and even at the very first
Yep.
performance in Schenectady, New York. And I remember just like after the show, whatever we were headed to, I guess it was that party that you're speaking of. I just remember um like talking to fans for like 30 minutes after the show and like
Yeah.
being like, oh, I gotta go to this part. Like it was like I didn't realize you just don't know what Newsies is until you're doing it. And it immediately I was like, wow, this is not gonna be like any other experience I've ever had.
Yeah. No, the
um
fansies really supported us from
yeah,
the very beginning.
yeah.
As I'd mentioned before, I really think Proctor's Theater is a great place to tech the show, but I also think Schenectady's kind of a perfect place to be as well.
Hmm.
When you're teching a show, you're really spending the bulk of your time in the theater. And so I think when people are teching shows in major cities like a Chicago or Miami or something, I would feel so antsy that I'm like missing out on something. And so what I like about Schenectady is it has every convenience you need. There's like a movie theater right down the street. There's a bunch of restaurants and coffee shops, but you're also not like in this giant city where you feel like you're missing out on a lot of stuff. So like
Yeah,
my
we could
hats are
focus for sure.
always off. Yeah, just hats off to that city. Did you have a good time in Schenectady?
I did. I agree. The downtown of Schenectady had a ton of cute restaurants and coffee shops and stuff that we could go to. And even after the show, that's another thing people don't think about. You do a show like Newsies, it's so physically demanding. I don't think any of us could just like go back to the hotel and go to bed afterwards. Like I
Oh
needed
yeah.
to replenish nutrients. Like I had to eat after the show. And in a lot of cities, you would just like have to order pizza because there was nothing else open. But I do remember Schenectady having some stuff open after the show, which was super helpful because it just, yeah, it gets really challenging to like, feed yourself when you're staying in a hotel room, so
Yeah.
I just appreciated the options. I remember there was this great place around the corner called Backstage Pub.
Oh
Do you
yeah,
remember
behind the
that?
stage door.
And
Yep.
I think it's sort of like
Like a crew
intended for
hangout.
a crew hangout theater people thing. But I remember just going there after the show sometimes, um and right across the street there was like this little street that had a bunch of little like restaurants and shops and stuff. And I remember there was a great coffee place in there, and I
Yes, so
think that's
that's
where Johnny's
Cafe
was.
Ambition.
Ambition, yes,
Cafe
exactly.
Ambition, it's
Yep,
amazing. I remember it's so like theater and artsy
yep,
inside. And I remember we had Stephanie Styles' birthday party there.
yep,
And her
yep.
mom, Bridget, shout out another momsy,
Another
like had delivered
very
these like
supportive mother,
beautiful
mom.
birthday cakes
Yep, yep,
from New
yep,
York
yep.
City for her birthday. And I also remember just down the street, there's a really great Mexican place called Mexican Radio that I
I
would
don't think I went there.
often go down and get food. But
I
so,
would go to this Thai place down the street, but I looked it up and it's not there anymore. It makes me very sad because I was going to
um,
recommend it, but it's not there. But there was a great Thai place back in the day in
yeah, if you're
Schenectady.
gonna see a show at Proctor's, like you are in a treasure trove of cute restaurants that are walking
Yeah,
distance for sure.
yeah, for sure.
Um, just another advantage I would say about being in Schenectady is there's an Amtrak station literally right downtown.
Yes,
You can
yes,
just get on that train. I don't know if you ever did it. I did it once.
I did. A lot of
It's
people would go
so
back to the city
convenient.
in between, like on our days off,
Days
when
off,
we would have
yeah.
some days off, and people could go back to New York. and straighten out their affairs, see their loved
Yeah.
ones, do whatever they needed to do. Yeah, it's very convenient. And also it allowed for some friends to come up to see the show really easily, right? Because they could walk from the train station to the theater. So that was
Yes,
super nice.
it's Schenectady, hats off, A plus. So
Yeah.
this leads us to our second official bus trip of the tour. We left on two coach
Mm.
buses again from our hotels in Albany en route to wonderful Waterbury, Connecticut. That trip is about 2.5 hours long. And typically, company management team announces when you get on the bus what types of stops there will be along the way. Technically, you can like take a vote either to push through to that city with maybe one or two little bathroom breaks, or you can actually vote to have like a proper meal break. I don't, to be honest, this bus trip was so short. I don't even really remember being on it. Do you?
No, I
Yeah,
think
I
we
don't.
were also hyped from our first stop. We were
So
so,
hyped.
like,
Yes.
yeah, I don't, and it was an easy one. I think, I
Yeah.
feel like we were there mid morning and could still, like it was,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I looked at, we had two hotel options, the Courtyard by Marriott or the Comfort Inn. And I don't think there was anyone who stayed at the Comfort Inn. I think we all stayed at the Courtyard.
I definitely stayed at the Courtyard because
Yeah.
aforementioned in the last episode or earlier this episode, I guess I am a Marriott boy
Right.
through
Of
and
course. There
through.
you
So
go.
yes, yeah, I'm earning those Marriott points right off the bat. Two cities in a row. I'm getting Marriott points.
Yes, come on. Like I said, take us to that SUNY Albany hotel. I remember I was rooming with Nico DeJesus. Always Nico
Nico.
DeJesus. I remember we just did this like weird merry-go-round like dance video. I was really stressed out, and he was like, "Angel, let's film this." And it was to "I Would Die for You" by Prince. I think it's my very first Instagram post if you go 10 years back. But anyway, the theater in Waterbury is the Palace Theater.
Yes.
I actually think it's really beautiful for such a small town. It was designed by Thomas Lamb and opened in 1921. And I was looking this up, like a lot of historic theaters in small towns, it actually shuttered in 1987. And then the citizens banded together and fundraised, and they did a huge renovation and rehab, and it reopened in 2004. It's also massive, 2,900 seats.
Wow.
Had you ever
Yeah.
been there before on tour?
I had not, but we were also there for a very short amount of
We
time,
were
right?
there
It was
so
only like
short.
two
It was
days or
like two
something.
days. So we were actually told the main reason that we even went to Waterbury was to give the crew another chance to practice loading in and
Loading.
loading out our massive set before
Yeah.
we officially opened the tour in Philadelphia the next week. That process of loading in a set, I mean, I'll bring a crew member on at some point to ask them, but it's got to be something like 16 hours, 20 hours, like
Oh yeah.
I don't know.
I know one of them did a oh my gosh, I'm gonna sound so old, but like the little video, where what I'm talking about, where you can like
Yeah.
watch the series
Watch
and yeah, and
yeah,
they
yeah.
filmed the whole thing so you could kind of watch it all come together. But yeah,
But
they
our
they work
set, those
very hard,
towers are just so enormous, and
very
like
big, yeah.
I can't
And
really remember how they did them, but they took them down in like layers.
yeah, what people don't realize, again, people give, the performers are the ones that have all these followers on social media and stuff, but we would have a day off, right? In between cities. Our crew would like travel overnight after our last show and they would be loading in on that day off.
Yep.
So the reason we had a day off is because they had to load in the show.
Yeah, like as
So
a truck would be loaded, that truck would then be driving through the night.
yeah, and I don't think people realize like that's the thing. They just had to work so much harder, than we did. And, so
Yeah, they truly never have a day off.
yeah, and so they would love it if we stayed in a city for more than 1 week because then they would get a day off finally. But if we traveled every week, they would always be working. So I would always feel guilty coming in to the first day of a theater in a new theater because we'd be like, "Ooh, Waterbury news,"
Hey.
and our crew was like on their they're always a
Yeah.
little fatigued from loading in, and they had to finish loading because there was a show that night. So
And for listeners who don't know, a proper day off with no travel is called a
golden
Golden
day.
Day. And on our union, on this contract, we were always guaranteed, I think, like one every 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something.
Yeah.
There's always a guaranteed amount, and if we didn't have one, they would like pay us a day or something.
Which like is so nice, but at the same time, when you just need a day off, you don't
You
really
need a
care
day
if you're
off, the
getting
money
paid.
doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So our crew,
Um,
especially, really worked very hard. There was definitely a many times in the tour where we were traveling every Monday, which means they were loading in. We were staying in each city for 1 week, which means they were loading into a new city on the quote unquote day off every week. So they deserve some extra applause for their work on that because we would get a day off to rest our bodies and our minds hands, and they would continue working and probably
Keep
work
doing
even
it.
harder that day because they had to, build all these things. And
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, like our touring set was the actual full Broadway set. As the listeners have come to know, you and I were both on the national tour of Cats, and it actually has a pretty famous set, the most recent version of the tour. Do you want to fill the listeners in on that?
oh yeah, I mean, so our some people would refer to it as like the bouncy house set, because it was inflatable. Now, I will agree that parts of it were inflatable, but basically what they did, which I think is brilliant, is they created these pieces, these structures that the cats could sit on, stand on, dance on, etc. But then, sort of the background behind them, the show Cats is set in a junkyard full of trash. And so instead of having to build these like piles of trash that go up 10, 20 feet in 10, 15 feet in the air, they would make them this kind of inflatable, like you would see at a bounce house, this inflatable piece that would be painted to look like
It
it
looked
was
really good, to be
it looked really
honest.
good. And honestly, people would come see the show and they'd be like, oh my gosh, I thought this was like the bouncy house set, but I guess that's a different tour. And I was like, nope, that was the bouncy house set that
Yep.
you just saw. Like, it really did fake people out. It doesn't
And you
look
get
like it's a
used
bouncy
to
house.
it. Like
Yeah.
if you touch it, it's soft. Did you ever? I remember we were on my first tour, we did, or sorry, on the Cats tour, we went to Brazil. And when
Oh,
they
okay.
do cities that are outside of the normal range, they would send the hard set. And
Yes. Right.
you would like run up the trunk of a car or something, and you would run up and like sit and you would like bang into the set. And you were so used to it being this
Soft.
bouncy castle.
Yes.
Yeah, like I'm sure I suffered some injuries to this day
Yeah.
from that.
The thing I remember
Uh,
the most is they had fans like constantly running backstage to keep it
yes,
inflated.
and
And it
you could
just,
talk
you could talk, and
backstage.
it
Yep.
really muted what was happening on stage. So it was like you actually kind of had to be very diligent
Quiet
about
during the
making
hard
sure
set.
that you would like not miss your entrance, or you wouldn't be because it was loud backstage. There was all these fans supporting so it was just a different
Yeah.
experience. But oh yeah,
I
the famous cat set, the Newsies set, not inflatable,
No,
very
it's
much climbable.
beautiful. But I would say my main memory of Waterbury was we were all kind of forced to be trained on this program that Michelle Obama and Disney kind of co-created together, I think,
Yep.
something like that. It's called Disney's Get Up and Go.
Yep.
Disney Theatrical Group has these teaching artists that are fantastic. I remember ours were Lauren Chapman and Kiara Danielle. Shout out to them. Do you want to explain a little bit to our listeners what
Yeah.
Disney's Get Up and Go is?
Yeah, I think Andrew and I were two people who did a lot of these, and maybe some of our
Yeah.
listeners even took a class with us. But we around the country as we would tour, we would do classes with sometimes schools, sometimes dance studios, sometimes theater groups, outreach organizations, and we would teach them sort of a version of the paper dance from Seize the Day. And the point of it, because Michelle Obama had this big program about getting kids more healthy and more active, the point of it from the Newsies perspective was to use Newsies and the excitement of doing the show to bring kids off the video games, off the couch, and have them dance. We both were teachers like all over the country. We did a lot of those teaching artist classes, which was so awesome.
We
I
would
think such
arrive in some cities and the kids had never heard of Newsies.
yeah.
And I was like, your teacher didn't even say these random strangers are coming,
Yeah, right.
like what they're doing. Yeah, it was
And
very
then
funny.
sometimes they were like theater kids who were like,
Who already knew the
obsessed,
dance and everything.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But so it just depends. But that was a fun way to kind of give back around the country. I taught a lot of classes, which was really exciting. And I still to this day, I've had some students that I teach in college, and I've had some like people that I've just encountered in the world who are like, I took your class in, Waterbury, Connecticut back in,
Wow.
and it's so funny. Like it really comes back around. In fact, one of the kids who took one of my Newsies classes in Tennessee was actually just like at the school I was just teaching at, and I like helped him graduate his college, and I was like, I remember when you were like 9 and you did. Yeah, and
Wow.
so it's pretty cool that that's a great way to hopefully inspire some young people to, even if it was just get moving, get active, but also possibly have an interest in theater or dance based on what they experienced at the Newsies workshop.
Thanks, Lauren and Kiara, and also
Yes.
Gregory Hanoyan from Disney for setting that up. I love coffee shops, and I was asking about your Schenectady favorite. Oh, Cafe Ambition, I would guess, is probably both of ours in Schenectady.
Yes. Yep.
But I'm embarrassed. I don't remember literally a single coffee shop in Waterbury. I'm sorry, Waterbury listeners.
I feel like so I I don't really have a lot of memories of Waterbury like establishments either. And I think it's just because we were there very briefly. Like
So
we were
short.
only
Yeah.
there. This was the shortest stop of the entire tour. One memory I do have is we went to trying to remember the name of it. I think it might have been called Dominic and Pia, but we went to an Italian place, like pizza place
I do remember
with
excellent pizza there.
Harvey Firestein actually came to see the show,
I
the
remember
writer of the book,
this.
and he took a bunch of us out to dinner between shows.
Yes. I think
And
I got shrimp scampi pizza and I had never heard of such a thing.
yeah. And so I do remember that, but we were just not there for very long, right? So I don't think we got to explore Waterbury very
Yeah.
much, unfortunately. I think most of your other episodes, you'll have lots of city, we were there for at least a
Yeah, of
week.
course.
Sometimes
Like
the
I
places
said,
we were
these
there for a
first
month. Yeah.
couple, my main memory from Waterbury, aside from Get Up and Go in the theater, was Jack Sipple and I took a walk to this place called the Brass Mill Center Mall. So if
Mhm.
you're looking for something to do, there's a mall within walking distance. And I just remember Jack, who is so like creative and artsy. I remember he was feverishly buying all these things from like Michael's to make us opening night cards.
I
And
love
that is
that.
a really riveting story. And I
Well,
also
no.
remembered starting to make my stage right book there, which is like a Bible documentation of all the formations and
Yeah.
for the show. Those are my two main takeaways.
My main takeaway is I think this was the first time that a fanzine gave me like something that was like cats and Newsies related. I still have it. It's like this little painting that has like cats at the top and Newsies at the bottom, and
Hmm.
I got this little like keychain lanyard thing. It said, but like I just remember the fanzines like again, we were so everyone kind of told us there's gonna be all these fans of Newsies, but they came out even in these first few stops. They were already there, giving us presents, doing all the things. It was really exciting. And I had a bunch. I
Aw.
had a bunch of friends from the city. This was really close to New York City, so I had a bunch of friends from the city and some students I taught on Long Island and that I had taught in Westchester came out to see the show. Like I had big groups of people in Waterbury, so that was exciting because you have to remember all these performers. Most of the performers are based out of New York City, and when you go out on tour, you very rarely come anywhere near New York City on a tour. So your friends and family and colleagues that are here often don't get to see you out on the road because Schenectady and Waterbury were probably the closest we got. And those were our first two stops. So, then we went for 2 years kind of pretty far away from the city all the time. I think we were in Philly. There's some other places that were commutable, but not really, really, really super close to New York
Yeah,
City.
you're
So
right. That Waterbury probably was the closest we got.
yeah. We did a few other
Um,
like Connecticut, like I think we played Hartford and so we had some other commutable ones, but
yeah.
those first two were probably one of the closest trips. And so yeah, so we had I think a lot of us had a lot of friends and folks come see us in these cities, which is probably another reason we weren't exploring because we were just, hanging out with people that came to see us and stuff. So it was super exciting that
Yeah.
was a good way to start some commutable places so our friends and family could come see it.
Well, speaking of being a travel podcast, one of my absolute favorite questions to ask people is this is a would you get to choose one, and this is fully paid for, you're very safe. It's going to be like a luxury, amazing experience. Would you rather go on a week trip to see tigers in India, pandas in China, or gorillas in Rwanda?
Andrew, that's such an evil question. I want to do all of those
It's tough,
things.
right? I know.
I mean, I feel like after seeing your trip to India, right? Is that where
Mm-hmm.
you went? Yeah. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like I was mesmerized by seeing photos. Andrew took a famous solo vacay to India on one of our layoffs from Newsies. And I'm sure he'll talk about it at some point in this podcast. But I don't think you only saw tigers, you saw all sorts of things. So I would say India because of that.
I obviously love tigers very much, very connected with tigers, but I'm actually gonna go gorillas in Rwanda.
I mean, you can't go wrong because
They're so hard, all three of
pandas
them.
in
Come
China would
on,
also be incredible. Yeah.
come
I
on.
think you and I are wanderlust people. I think we
Well,
both love
we're
traveling.
outdoor cats, right?
Yeah,
From our
outdoor
first
cats.
episode, outdoor cat. This is the outdoor cat. I don't really want to live with a gorilla or a panda or a tiger in my apartment in New
No,
York.
no. Well, you already have
But
that dolphin, so it's too hard to
I have the dolphin.
yeah.
And do you know that there's a famous story about a man in Harlem who had a Bengal tiger in his apartment?
No.
And oh yeah, and literally like he was caught this is like he had it for like years, and he was caught because he went to the hospital with like bite marks to his kneecap or something, and then the police had to like swing into his apartment through like a window and like do
My
something with this
goodness.
tiger, and it was wild. Anyway,
Wow.
tangents. Hey, Chaz, I cannot thank you enough for being my very first guest on this podcast.
It is
As
an
I was
honor.
saying, this idea of like doing a travel log where it's every city of the tour, I've always wanted to do it, and I've just been like, oh, eventually, it needs to be perfect and blah, blah, but like, screw it. You just need to do it. And
You
I
do
have
just need to
had
do it.
the best time talking with you, and let that be a lesson for all of our lives. Just do the damn thing.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
you can get imposter syndrome and get in your own way and think like, oh, I don't know how to do this. But you and I talk about Newsies every time we see each other and we always remember something. So
Something
you're just
silly, and
doing that with this and you're
yeah,
just recording it this time so other people can enjoy it. And
and it's
honestly,
been 10 years.
it's been 10. It's really wild. It feels like yesterday and 30 years ago at the same
I
time.
know.
What's nice is it's like an audio scrapbook for us. And, I can't wait to listen to what our friends from the show say about other cities and about their memories and stuff. I mean, there's just so many. This was a huge part of our lives. Anything that you do for 2 years obviously is going to be a huge part of your life. But I think this was a major experience for all of us. And if the memories created are never lost. And even like what I'm excited for is the ones that I kind of forgot about that someone will bring up or you'll bring up and I'll
Right.
just be
Yeah.
like,
I
oh
mean, you
my
brought up
gosh, I
so
forgot about
many.
that.
Yeah.
It's so like, yeah, it was a really great experience overall. I think people could sense that as the time went on, and it's so awesome to go back and just reminisce about the good, as Jeff
Yeah.
Calhoun said, the good old days. These are the good old days.
These are the good old days, and get to
Yeah.
know everyone in your life, and everyone is worth knowing.
Yeah.
Well, Chaz, listeners, you can catch him on social media at what? Dancin' Chaz?
Dance and Chaz.
DANCINCHAZ. Also, every year he is directing and choreographing so many shows. Do you have a website
I do. ChazWolcott.com.
with two T's?
Two T's, one L, two
Yeah.
T's.
And he is choreographing a number for this amazing J. Armstrong Johnson, I Put a Spell on You, Halloween benefit coming up. And also, you can catch him in the role of Buttons on Disney Plus currently. The live capture that we did in Hollywood in 2016 is still preserved there. So,
And I have to
anyway,
say one memory about that before we finish. And that is that I want everyone to know that they music, added music to a show that had been performed for 4+ years. They added music in the bows so that this fine podcast host, Andrew Wilson, could get an amazing tumbling pass across in the bows. So when you see that amazing tumbling pass that he does, he defies gravity. Just know that it was so important to all of us to get that in there that they added orchestrations for it.
hey, nurse, can we? Yeah, we need Chaz is out of his bed again. I know. You're crazy.
I'm
Thank you
just
very
telling
much.
facts
Very
around here,
sweet.
Andrew.
Very sweet. But thank you so much for tuning in to Carrying the Banner. We'll catch you next episode where we travel to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania for the opening of the tour. Okay.
Opening night.
Woo. Ciao.